Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Cha and this is on costing systems. So this is part 1 of the series. Let me walk you through what this is about, and thank you once again you're watching this on my YouTube channel. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? Basically we're going to understand what's the purpose of costing systems, right? And then the different types of costing systems that is generally practiced. Okay, so there's the job and there's the batch and the process costing systems. And we're going to look at finally the question of why is it so important to choose an appropriate costing system. So what are costing systems? Well, there are many ways to define costing systems. So basically these are, well, you can say that these are methods, but in general these methods, whatever they are, helps to determine the cost of producing the goods and services, right? Now why is it so important to determine cost? Because the thing is, if you're not able to determine cost, you wouldn't be able to price a product properly, and not being able to price a product properly means that the business may not be able to achieve the profits that it desires. So profits that are desired to be achieved becomes either too low or if not becomes too high, right? Well, if profits are too high, it may not be a good thing, because it may be indicative that the product is priced too high and that it may not be sustainable, right? Pricing goods is a very delicate art because it also affects to a large extent business competitiveness. So therefore it's essential that pricing is as precise and as appropriate as possible in order to avoid situations such as discouraging customers from coming back again to buy more goods, or perhaps even encouraging customers to come over and purchase goods that are wrongly priced. So costing enables us as managers or management to understand the viability of the different product lines and service divisions, right? So this absolutely helps, right? At least businesses, managers are able to understand better about how are costs of production derived. Okay, and with that, owners are able to better then decide whether certain special orders are worthwhile pursuing, whether one-off orders are worthwhile accepting. Alright, in business there will be ad hoc orders that may arise, and it is important to assess whether the cost of fulfilling these, right, whether the cost of fulfilling these are realistic. Alright, now you might think that how difficult can that be? Imagine if you were going to ask McDonald's whether they are willing to, for instance, offer a special, let's say a special meal where here it comes with a unique recipe that McDonald's doesn't have on the shelf. Now if you're going to ask McDonald's for this unique recipe that, the special burger that they do not even have on the shelf, chances are McDonald's may not even want to accept your special order. Reason being that special orders do require more time and require a certain amount of effort to fulfill. Right? So management needs to understand whether all these special orders and one-off orders are worthwhile fulfilling and accepting. So let's look at an example of costing. Right? Take for instance, there is a bakery. Right? The bakery, basically what they have done is that they have incurred the following costs, right? And this will be the case even the following year. So the total material cost will be 3,000, and labor cost for that year was 2,000, overheads was 1,000. And for this same year, interestingly, the business only produced 2 cakes. Now how much would it be the cost of producing each cake? Now this is very simple, because you know for sure that it is just simply taking the total divided by 2, the total number of cakes. Now obviously it is quite ridiculous to that to produce one cake it will cost $3,000. That's quite crazy. Okay, but you realize something, that Why is it that we can take 6,000 divided by 2? Because we know that there are only these two cakes being produced. And if we assume that these are the same, exact same, then we know for sure that each cake should cost $3,000. Right? When I say same, it means in terms of the materials, the design, the labor effort, exactly the same. Okay? Now, so these assumptions about like all cakes being the same, that's an assumption, but not necessarily true. Impulse buy, I say that there is only one design of cake being produced. There has to be at least a few varieties of cake being produced, and you're going to have like a few flavors even. But then again, in my example, I made the assumption that there is only one type of cake being produced. Obviously, also, not all cakes will cost the same to produce. Some cakes will cost more because of the size. Some cost less, again, because of the size. Some may cost more because of the type of material being used, right? And the case of bakery is that there is always some degree of customization in terms of the design, maybe in terms of the wording. Okay, so these do come into play, right? So how then do we allocate the costs of producing the cakes to each cake, so that we are able to determine the cost of each cake produced? Right, that's important to know. Right, it is easy to know what is the material cost of producing each cake. It is also simple to find out what is the labor cost of producing each cake, because it is possible to measure the materials used. It is possible to measure the man-hours used to produce the cakes. Now, what is quite difficult is that the overheads are not exactly so straightforward to assign to each cake. Right? If you produce 2 or 3 cakes, how would you know that each cake would incur a certain amount of overheads? Overheads, to define, include such costs as rentals, maintenance. How will we know how much of this rental is for that one cake being baked and produced? How do we know how much of that maintenance is for that one additional cake produced? It is very difficult because there is very little relationship between overheads and each unit of output, which is the cake. The relationship isn't clear. The relationship, however, between material and cake is very clear, because you can tell that 1 kg went into that 1 cake. You can tell that that 1 hour of labor went into that 1 cake. So that is very easy to observe. But in the case of overheads, it is very difficult to observe, like how the production of cakes would give rise to overheads. The cause and effect relationship is very weak. Right? You can't see exactly that relationship. So let's amend the example further, right? And you can see that this is even more challenging in this case. If I were to expand the example a bit and say that the 2 cakes being produced is cheesecake and sponge cake, now we have a very big problem. Why? Because, observe, the cheesecakes require these materials, right? 300 kg of raw materials, and sponge cake required 200 kg of raw materials. Labor hours 100 for cheese, 100 for sponge cakes. Now, how then is the cost of making each cake? Let's find out. Now, you could easily find out, let's start with the cheesecake. So, the first thing is that we need to determine what is the material cost for the cheesecakes. That's very simple. So material in total that was used was 500 kilos, and then we had used 300 kilos for cheesecakes. 300 over 500 multiplied by 3,000. So that gives you 1,008. Right, so we know that the cost of producing, the material cost of producing the cheesecake is $800. How about labor cost? Labor cost of producing each cheese of all the cheesecakes, okay, that would be 100 over 200 multiplied by 2000. So that gives 1000. So we found out what is the total material and labor cost for producing cheesecakes only. Right? Now, however, in this case, I did not mention like how many cheesecakes and sponge cakes were produced. Okay, that's fine. Okay, let's assume that there are 1000 cheesecakes and 1000 sponge cakes. Okay? So then in this case, it's possible to say that the material and labor cost per cake should be 800 plus 1000 divided by 1000 cheesecakes. So this tells us that the material and labor cost per cheesecake has to be $1.80. Right. Determining the material and labor cost is fairly simple, as I mentioned to you, because it is possible to measure the weight of materials used, labor hours being used to produce the cakes. Right. Now, using the same methodology, you could use this to determine the material and labor cost of each sponge cake. But then that you could explore on your own. Okay. Let's think about then what about the overheads? How do we know how much of the overheads should go to each cake? Now this is a tough topic to debate about, because one thing is that, as I mentioned to you, the relationship between overheads and units of output is quite weak. We can't really see a clear relationship. So to be able to determine the overheads per cake, we may sometimes make assumptions like we could spread the overheads according to the number of cakes produced, but in other cases we could spread the overheads according to the number of man hours used for the month. So this requires a bit of assumption. Right. And that assumption is pretty much dependent on judgment made. Okay? Now, so let's come back to this. So then how do we know what's the overhead per cake? Very simple. In this case, we had 100. We could use the number of cakes that were produced. So there were 1000 cheesecakes. Total, how many cheesecakes and sponge cakes were produced? 2000. 1 plus 1 gave you 2000. So 1000 over 2000 multiplied by total overheads. So this then tells us that there were $500 of overheads for the cheesecakes. So to find out what is the overhead per cake, what we do is that we take 500 divided by 1000. So that tells us that it would be 50 cents per cheesecake. The same method can also be applied on sponge cakes. Okay, so therefore, total cost per cake would be equals to 180, and this 180 is for material and labor, right? And then adding 50 cents for an amount of overhead allocated. That gives you $2.30 to make each cheesecake, right? So this, as you can see here, the calculation seems quite crude, because we make assumptions like that each of we can allocate the cheesecakes, the overheads to all cheesecakes using the quantity of cheesecakes produced, but that isn't quite right. Okay, if you think of it realistically, should we use something like labor hours to allocate the cost of overheads? Because baking is a labor intensive process, so therefore overhead costs should be allocated on the basis of labor hours. Okay, but then even if you use labor hours in this case, you wouldn't change the answer. Okay, right, so that is how you can determine the total cost per cake. Looking on. So what you have realized is that the cost of making each cake is much clearer, right? Because we make the assumption that the bakery doesn't bake one type of cake for sale. It has sponge cake and cheesecakes, right? So, and when you look at the different types of products being produced, when you have those details, it becomes much clearer as to how to allocate the costs to each product line. And for sure is that if we are able to determine what exactly is the cost of producing a good, it means that the pricing would also be much more competitive. Okay, so that's really the point here. Right, what you have seen just now was a very simple example, and in general there are different costing systems. Like for the case of my example, what is very appropriate for a bakery is a job costing system, assuming that the bakery produces certain unique cakes from time to time for special orders, right? And where each customer is different and they have special tastes and requests, then the bakery better be using a job costing system. Okay, so there is the batch costing and the process costing. Some textbooks treat job and process cost as the same system, right? And that's true. Okay, we have a look at the explanation why. Now, job cost is very appropriate because what it does is that it traces all costs of production, material, labor, to each individual unit of output. Right, this is very appropriate for businesses which provide a wide variety of customization for their products and services. Right, when you have customization, this results in either more labor hours or less labor hours to complete the customer order. Typical example of businesses practicing job costs would be like bakeries, high-end car manufacturers, dental clinics. So as a result, this leads to different prices being charged to different customers, and this is mainly due to the different amount of resources being used to fulfill each order. Batch cost is essentially the same as job cost. So in some books, job cost is taken as the same as batch cost. So instead of saying job cost and batch cost, you may see that some books only refer to job cost, and it's assumed that batch cost is a part of job cost. Okay, the difference between job and batch is that for batch costing, it assumes that each order has many identical units, and each batch would differ from each other because of the customization done on each batch. Businesses that practice batch cost includes car manufacturers, drug manufacturers, right, electronic good manufacturers such as handphone and mobile devices. Process cost is a costing system that allocates equal amounts of cost to each individual unit of output. So it is very appropriate if there is no customization required. Examples include drink manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies producing drugs, right, where each unit is exactly the same. Okay, and that there is no customization involved. So then process cost will be used. Application in real life. So businesses may not just apply one single costing system, right? In modern times, businesses are more likely to use a combination of different costing methods, right? Like a drug manufacturer may practice job costing and for certain special ad hoc orders, and yet they may apply process costing for generic drugs, for example. So businesses may not just practice one costing system only, right? They may use a combination of different systems, right? And what makes a costing system effective is the availability of accurate and reliable cost data. So without reliable and cost data, then of course, rubbish in, rubbish out. So accurate data is necessary for accurate costing. Right, so this completes my part 1 of this series of videos on costing systems. So in the following video, we'll talk more about the mechanics of job, batch and process cost. Right? Though I have already prepared process cost, you could see it on my YouTube channel. Okay, thank you for watching. I'm Wildicha, and you have been watching this on my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.